totally fine with me.
Okay. Hi. So, hi, Greg. So basically, I wanted to. I thank you for your offer that you wanted to discuss your tree of knowledge system, and as you know, I quite interested in the discussions you have with John Vervaeke and with Jordan Hall, and especially like it's quite exciting to see this this discussion at the edge of, I don't know, my knowing or understanding, but also at the edge of your system, like trying to find another level in this tree of knowledge system. So maybe
that's right.
I don't know, what would you, how would you like to discuss it, or maybe just
sure.
Like, to give me an idea. I can tell you what what I grasp from your system, but maybe you can tell me like what you are up to, like
sure.
Yeah, these days.
So so we're on the same page, so that you know the tree of knowledge then, okay? That right there is the unified theory of knowledge tree behind me, okay? So it gets kind of confusing. The first branch, each one of those circles behind me is a branch, except for the yellow one. And the first branch going from the left is the tree of knowledge system, okay? And then the 8 branches together with the flower in the middle, that also makes up the unified theory of knowledge tree. And so that's and it's an artistic representation of my whole scientific humanistic philosophy, which basically I am arguing that we need an upgrade in our scientific philosophical systems, okay, from the Enlightenment. I believe that the Enlightenment created an enormous set of insights where we moved from, you know, a combination of Greco-Roman philosophy and Judeo-Christian philosophy, and the way they man in the universe, using man there, you know, we wake up to that. And then you get the Enlightenment, and you get modern empirical natural science, okay? And modern empirical natural science offers a whole nother epistemology for generating truths about the universe. And it's an effective epistemology for physics, i.e. matter in motion, and energy beneath that, and pretty effective for biology, life, okay? But as an epistemology, and given the ontologies, the theories of the way the world actually worked at the time, and over the period of time, the system was completely inadequate in its capacity to deal with mind and persons, okay? And it didn't know what its relationship was as a knowledge system between truth claims that transcend people, okay, and sets of knowledge that people get together and decide based on whatever new epistemological rules to be legitimate. In other words, what is the...
Because it deals with the third person kind of perspective,
yes.
And it's inadequate, or it doesn't, it cannot be applied to the first person like a subjective, and the second person like a collective intersubjective.
That's right. It creates, if you're familiar with integral theory, integral has a nice epistemological quadrant model, whereby it divides the subjective and intersubjective up onto the left-hand side, upper left and lower left. And then it argues that there is an exterior epistemological view that science generates both at individual and collective levels, the it and its view, okay? And I think Wilber's exactly right that this exterior epistemological shift that modern empirical natural science, what I call men's knowledge, okay, to be provocative, but this is actually, I do this also to set the stage for a postmodern critique, okay, of it.
Yeah, because modernism perceived humans mostly as Western white men or something.
That's right.
Like
Humanity was man, and the normative entity in the Euro-Western colonial Euro structure was, well, the smartest and most advanced examples who were leading this, and the reason they were contributing were white men. They were superior to others. That was embedded and ingrained. And the fusion with the way in which modernist knowledge was generated, scientific knowledge, and the social categories and the power structures, all of which came along, created certain kinds of relations that the paradigm itself, because it wasn't really clear on what scientific knowledge was relative to cultural knowledge in general. It didn't have a good way of cleaving that. It gets in what is a person, what is knowledge, what's objective knowledge, subjective and intersubjective knowledge. They didn't have systems for really effectively cleaving the relations between those domains. And so it opened itself up both to sort of a colonial hegemony in narrow patriarchal ways, and then that then in turn opened up the postmodernist critique in part of modernist knowledge. So you get in the back half of the 20th century, we see the explosion of attacks on the claim that you can develop a transcendental objective view of anything, but everything is then embedded in social power, knowledge, language contexts, okay, that the postmodernists and post-structuralists, what we can
that's
delineate.
The deconstructive move, or
the deconstructive move of post-structural postmodernists, and the necessary of decoupling social categories, whiteness, maleness, heterosexuality, Christianity, with power, okay, and the nature of objectivity versus the social construction of shared truths, and what is that fine-grained relation, okay? So I like to argue, what I argue is that the Enlightenment had what I call the Enlightenment Gap, okay? And the Enlightenment Gap has two facets to it. One is, what is the proper metaphysical relationship between matter and mind, okay? It failed on that. That's why, hence we have the great mind-body problem, all right? And then what specifically kind of knowledge is scientific knowledge, and what is it relationship to normal, pragmatic, social, political knowledge, okay? And this is modernism versus postmodernism. And the Enlightenment Gap, there was no philosophy of science writ large that solved those two problems together, okay? And then we get the explosion of modernism, because it does a lot of unbelievably good things too, but within a lot of problems as well. And we have no adequate knowledge system. Enlightenment 2.0 will bridge the Enlightenment gap, solve the mind-matter metaphysical problem, and solve clarity about what natural science is as a kind of justification system in relationship to justification systems in general. And that's what the unified theory of knowledge is all about.
Mm-hmm. Wow, great. So I am familiar a bit with these Wilber's kind of quadrants because, well, just from Zach Stein's Education Between the Worlds, if I read the book. I don't know if I got correct the title, but I'm using, I don't know how related they are, but they're quite related, but I'm using these Forrest Landry's kind of
big three, immanent metaphysics. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm kind of, well, I read it, I don't know if I grasp all of it, but they are basically these three kind of perspectives, or these three views, so that can be kind of mapped onto first person, second person, third person, because it sounds more maybe better than the omniscient, transcendent, and immanent perspective or something. But it's kind of, at least in my head, I'm mapping it on these three. And then maybe your enlightenment gap then resides between the third person and the second person, and between second person and first person. I don't know if I got it right.
Well, I mean, so I've read Forrest Landry's stuff. I really should get in touch with him and have a conversation. I do better when I actually talk to people, then I can really sort where they're coming from. And his stuff is deep and interesting, but I'm not sure that I have mastery on the first time through of his immanent metaphysics.
It's difficult.
And so, I want to then talk to him, and then I'll be able to achieve much more mastery, and then I'll be able to correspond. So I have reasonable mastery with Wilber. So I would prefer, but Wilber's, so the pre-modern state of affairs for Wilber gets this right in relationship to his critique, in my opinion, of what happens in modernity. And that is that we can think about the first, second, and third person, okay, in the big three of truth, goodness, and beauty, right? And goodness generally is actually a second person concept, beauty a first person concept, and truth a third person concept. Okay, certainly the way he then delineates those perspectival. And we can certainly see goodness and beauty as being more interior, humanistic, subjective, socially constructed domains, and truth as being more of an objective third-person perspective. So goodness and beauty get a little tangled first and second perspective. But anyway, you can put goodness and beauty broadly on one side of the interior epistemological view, meaning I see the world through my first person perspective, where you and I get together and create a mythos of what is good, okay, in the lower right, lower left. And then you have science at the individual and systemic level, okay, trying to develop objectivist kind of truth claims in relationship to what the world is from some sort of independent third-person measurement system. Okay, so what Wilber points out is that one of the things that the pre-modern scholastic tradition had going before science is that these things were relatively well balanced, and education could have a nice triangle. If it's just the big three, it's a triangular relation of we need to appreciate aesthetics, we need to appreciate ethics, we need to appreciate epistemological truth claims, and all of these things are wrapped up together, and together they make what it means to be whole or human or society. Now, when science then breaks off the truth claims of that section and then develops this new unbelievably powerful epistemology, and then also it comes with a matter in motion ontology, okay, then it yanks that section off, explodes it, okay, and then fundamentally diminishes it, diminishes the power of the other two. So part of what an Enlightenment 2.0, to get back to your question about what I'm trying to do, is I'm trying to reestablish the proper bridge between the humanistic epistemologies and knowing, goodness and beauty on the left-hand side of the Wilber quadrants, with a proper alignment in the right-hand side, and the recognition that modernity and capital neoliberal ways of thinking about the world diminish goodness and beauty. And there are ways to restore that balance. So part of the Enlightenment 2.0 vision is a return, a crossing back to the humanistic side with coherence and consilience between scientific and humanistic epistemologies, even though there'll always be tensions and differences between them, and reestablish a proper balance between the quadrants that is a lot more conducive, I believe, to the kinds of lifestyles, values, and societies that we need to generate if the 21st century is going to go okay on the back half of it, which I'm not confident at all of. So we'll see.
Yeah. It's also what I mentioned in my article. There was this book by Gregory Rollins called The Human Swarm. I was quite amazed by it, but he used this metaphor that we are standing on the shoulders of giants, like we have 50,000 years and 2,000 generations behind us, and maybe 2 generations and 50 years ahead of us. So we need to kind of, if we don't transition into some kind of, what is it, like a liminal, through some liminal stage into this butterfly, caterpillar to butterfly metaphor, kind of.
That's right.
And so,
that's exactly right.
And your work, and also Jordan's work with Civium and John Vervaeke's work, I think points in this direction.
100%.
With 100%. This ToK, or theory of knowledge, or this the adjacent right. Possible, like looking. Yeah, I mean, yeah,
well, this is huge. I mean, this is, I knew, like I like to say, 6 weeks, I don't remember exactly, but 6 weeks to 6 months after, in 1997, the tree of knowledge fell out of me in 1997 on just some night where I was stoned, thinking about the world. I just had a vision, and drew some stuff out, okay? Yeah. And that became, then it was the 4 upside down cones. I saw the geometric spatial relation of matter, life, mind, and culture as 4 upside down cones, all right? And that was life transformative, because it all of a sudden created a schematic structure to recategorize, create a new taxonomy for the world, okay? That had been embedded in many knowledge systems, but not elucidated at this level of clarity. And it immediately addressed the problem of psychology, because with it comes these ideas of joint points, okay? So now you get the 4 dimensions, and then you get the intersections between the dimensions. Those are joint points. And then it shows there's a life to mind joint point that's akin to the matter to life joint point. And it shows that there's a mind to culture joint point that's akin to the life to mind. Well, once you see that there's those two joint points, and you think about the theory of evolution and all that it meant in biology of, from Darwin into the 20th century, and the development of the modern synthesis, and what an unbelievable architecture of understanding that is, and how clear it is to everybody that we need to know how to go from matter to life. Well, with the trope, then we need a mind evolution and a cultural evolution understanding of the joint point. Mm-hmm. And remarkably, no one had that. And in fact, the whole reason our field of called psychology was so confused is that we missed the fact that there are two unbelievably other crystal clear joint points that are as clear as the difference between life and matter, that need to be specified, articulated, and delineated. And the ideas of them, the size of those ideas and their implications, each one of them is the size of Darwin's theory of evolution. So it's really like, whoa, okay? So there's that, and that's one reason the ideas are tough to deal with, because they actually you zoom so far back, and then they introduce these new ideas and start moving stuff around. But here's the other kicker that gets back to this point. Why? What are those things? Well, life, mind, and culture, okay, are dimensions of complex, dimensions of behavioral complexity, or they're planes of complex adaptive behavioral process, okay, that are regulated and mediated by information processing systems within and communication between to generate structures of regulatory information energy control, okay? So what is life? It's got DNA, RNA, builds proteins, creates a membrane, regulates information inside relative to information outside, accumulates that information, and communicates with cells. Okay, and then that's the essence of, that's the life dimension. And then mind is the same way, only this time you get cells collected in the nervous system, moving an animal around, animal-animal communication. Okay? Then you get language connecting minds and person-to-person communication, and then you get culture. All right? So information processing communication systems set the stage for the landscape of complex adaptive behavior. All right?
Yeah, so it's like behavior, and then culture is like some kind of meta behavior or something like that, mediated by language or some types of language. Or
right. My preference is to say, well, matter is behavior, material behavior. Then life is meta behavior over that. Okay. And then organic behavior, which is superimposed upon material behavior, but then operates based on, and then you get mental behavior on top of organic behavior. Then you get cultural behavior on top of that. And the tree of knowledge maps all that. Okay.
And so your joint points, it's I think Jordan Hall, he mentioned some concept like portal pathways, or I don't know if I remember it correctly, but I like this idea of emergence compared or versus phase shifts, because phase shifts, if I'm correct, they can be, you can go up and down, like from water to steam and back, but with emergence, actually Alexander Bardhi kind of in his book, I got this distinction. With emergence, it's like not symmetrical. So once you get life, you cannot decompose a chicken, let's say, and then deconstruct the chicken and reconstruct it together. So that's kind of interesting. So there is some kind of like maybe narrow portal, or I don't know, into the higher plane, or I don't know.
That's right. Right. Well, this is the adjacent possible, and there are an enormous number of constraints on it on the one hand. So it has to now be, cells have an enormous regulatory structure to them. We go all the way back to prokaryotes, and we can look at, there's a lot of constraint structure inside of cells, and yet the structure of DNA, RNA, and cell-cell communication then opens up adjacent possible opportunities through that constraint to then create everything we identify as life, okay? Well, the nervous system's the same basic way. It opens up, it's constrained by the ways in which energy information flows through the nervous system, okay? To then, in fact, this is what I'm working with John Vervaeke, who's basically realizing the core essence of mind is realizing relevant information to carve out paths of behavioral investment. Okay, that's basically what the constraints of the path of the third dimension on the tree of knowledge, mind, is. Okay, because that's what animal behavior fundamentally is about: processing the animal environment relation, extracting relevant to realize a path of investment. Okay, that regulates energy information. So that's John's relevant realization, encapsulated or linked up with behavioral investment theory. which is my joint point. Okay, and he nails the neurocognitive functional view of the nervous system way more than I've seen anybody. That's why I love his work so much. It's like he really nailed that. Okay, then we then get to my initial insight in 1996, before the whole tree of knowledge, was this justification theory. That's what I originally called it. Then the hypothesis, it gets confusing. That's what I published for a while, because that is the portal pathway complexity building feedback loop. Okay, that then translates us into cooperative, sophisticated, gesturing primates that have rhythm together, that can hunt together, build fires together, into the emergence of personhood, okay, which we, through talking and propositional claims that then get questioned, which turn into justification dynamics and justification systems. All right, that's when you were just speaking of the author you mentioned. Now you have a 50,000 year period of accumulating intergenerational knowledge, because we can now build these through the adjacent possible of the justification dynamic. We can now build the storage of propositional knowledge and then carry that across the generations, because now I can come and tell you, oh, this is how we hunted, this is what we did. You know what your grandfather did, at the great challenge of the hunting of the antelope, or whatever the hell, whatever oral indigenous originally populations were. And that sets in motion the evolution of the culture person plane of existence. Okay, so then it just asks, well, what you should be on the lookout is when whatever systems that are being operated then start to develop yet another portal into information processing communication systems, because that's the obvious pattern. Okay, that's why I knew when I built the Tree of Knowledge in 1997 that the 21st century was going to be an unbelievable time to be alive. And the reason was crystal clear, because we were constructing the portal. We didn't realize it, but we were constructing the portal of the fifth joint point. We were laying down artificial intelligence processing. We were laying down communication networks. We were laying down an internet. We're going to build virtual reality and create information interface across a whole new landscape, the digital, which Alexander Bard sees unbelievably clearly. And I saw, back 20 years ago, it's like, oh
digital
my God.
empire, digital
the
empire,
digital empire,
or
yeah.
global empire,
right.
or something, I don't know. Yeah.
Well, I mean, he nails it's the digital, and Marshall McLuhan and other people that were aware of how powerful mediums of communication are, would have sensed that. But anyway, so yeah, I knew that. And then the question is, well, what are the proper constraints, and what are the kinds of things that will give rise to, wise flourishing in this new territory as we go through the portal? And what are the dangers that we face, both chaos dangers and hyper-ordered dangers? And we have to create an order-chaos dialectic that enables the appropriate flourishing, that enables consistency across the various levels and dimensions, so that each system can be harmonized and not get way out of balance, which threatens the integrity of the whole process.
Yeah, like this global empire, or digital empire, or distributed, I don't know, power structure or something. Like, I'm also following just a bit this guy called Balaji Srinivasan. He's like quite a prominent investor in Silicon Valley, and he, for example, positions this digital compared or versus China, like authoritarian. So it's not like the US versus China in the 21st century, but it might be like the global digital versus nation state like China or something like that.
Sure.
So just to and also this Gregory Rollins, he's like a computer science professor from also US professor, but I forgot which school, who wrote this The Human Swarm. He also mentioned something like a meta concerts. I mean, I like the term, so it's like, but in kind of way that we are maybe just on the verge of seeing this kind of global instant collaborations, and kind of, he says that it's compared to companies that might last years or decades, these might be just like minutes or something, or like a life of an instinct, but it could be also longer, but like this kind of global cooperations. And I think we are already seeing something like that, like well, just a very, very short example, well, we are doing something in Kenya. Like I have some friends, but I haven't visited for like for some reasons for 3 years. Like we don't have an active project there. But I needed like well, for the first time, like a couple of months ago, I tested like this M-Pesa. They have it since 2007. It's like a digital money, like a mobile banking in Kenya, you know. And I can send money to Kenya now. Well, a couple of euros, let's say, and it only cost me €3 to send it to Kenya to people
Right.
in rural areas in extreme poverty. It well, it cost me like €3. I can send €30, let's say, and the person gets it like in a couple of minutes. So it's much faster than the banking. Like let's say I send money to my colleague, and
of course,
he sees it in 2 days or something like that.
Right,
so and this is just an example of this acceleration. It's something like termites building building a house, not being aware of, or some like the
totally.
yeah,
No,
something like that.
Yeah,
so
that's exactly right. Yeah. So it opens up an enormous amount of adjacent possible space when you get these information processing communication networks. And then it transcends whatever old infrastructures were necessary to put constraints on energy information exchange. Okay. And that's why we're seeing such chaos. All right. So that just think of what we did to the animal world, why we became more than a super predator. All right. And the reason was because the culture person evolution, just as you opened up with, allowed for an acceleration of information processing communication that then allowed us energy control over the environment in a way that just kicks the crap out of all the other big mammals, right? You know, and essentially that's been happening now is that as we now hook up into digital spaces, okay, what that the affordances that this brings, boom, now I can get money to Kenya in 3 minutes, right? Or you and I can pop in and have a rich interpersonal conversation with no travel, you know, and then exchange all this kind of information over the internet in ways that just, you know, of course, were unthinkable 50 years ago, yet alone, you know. And so now what's available, but then, and the danger, however, is that there's so much available and so many possibilities, that they don't get, there's not constraints on them in a particular way. And the old system, which is trying to control stuff, is now out of date, and it's grabbing for things, you know, and trying to hold things and trying to apply the old structures of understanding. And that transition is always a precarious time, in my opinion. I mean, we are a precarious time because there's so much flux and so many different variables as these emerge, these adjacent possible spaces emerge. And the old system is, you know, with the people in power trying to control things. You know, it's fasten our seatbelts, right? It's going to be
quite fascinating, but it's also frightening. So, but it's good to
It's excitement and anxiety provoking at the same time. If you're not feeling both anxious and excited, you're not paying attention in my ball.
But it's good time for all those psychotechnologies that John Vervaeke mentions, like all those meditations. Like 2 years ago, I wasn't meditating or anything, and like now because also some back pain or whatever, I'm doing some Kundalini yoga. I'm trying to all kind of things. I mean, just be.
Well, that's why I was so drawn to John and Jordan themselves, because they came together, right? And they were like, okay, they both could see in their own way that we're in the middle of this big transition. And not only that, they could see, John knew that there were psychotechnologies and Jordan was thinking about coherence. And together they were like, you know, peanut butter and chocolate. And they're like, hey, we need this meta psychology tech. Okay. And so I'm sitting over here in Stewart Straff, Virginia. And I'm like, I mean, what have I been doing for the last 20 years is exactly that, building a metapsychological system. I mean, that's what this is. I mean, I'm a clinician. So, you know, my primary focus in my professional training is how to help people deal with what Zach would call the problems of ensoulment, you know, and what's happening to make us our souls so sick, and how would we actually cultivate the right kind of ecological system that would actually be wise as the world changes so dramatically. You know, that's the fundamental problem that the garden is addressing, is that's at the nexus of all that. So when they were like, oh, we need metapsych tech, I'm like, no doubt, that's it. I mean, sign me up for that conversation.
Yeah, I watched but it's just a shorter video. I think the Calm MO, like your kind of framework or method. But I'm yet to watch the longer videos that those two, like yeah. So, but this was like a couple of minutes, but it was some kind of snippets of your, or maybe 5-10 minute videos or something like that. Of
Right,
your,
I tried to.
various pieces of your work, and one of them was this calm MO. But so,
Exactly
but
right.
yeah, I'm
Yeah,
yet
so
to explore it. So, like,
it represented on the black dot on the other side of the tree. So on the right side, if you come up, you see the little black dot there. That's an image of an eye looking down. Calm MO is exactly that. It's a psych tech, if you use that terminology. It consolidates all of the principles and processes for an integrated approach to psychological mindfulness. That's what
mindfulness.
it does. And that puts the guardrails on, well, what happens in our socio-emotional process? When do we get knocked off, bumped? Somebody says something that pisses you off, activates your defense, you attack. Like much of my work then is, well, how do people get derailed into what I call neurotic loops? Okay. Yeah. And then those neurotic loops constrain you and trap you. COM-MO basically is a consolidation of the kinds of principles that then you need to develop as a metacognitive ability observer to be transformed.
It happened just before this call when I realized my internet is off, and I was like, "What's happening? What's happening?"
Right.
Greg is gonna hate me. Like, I will disappoint you.
Right, but then I can come up and be curious, and we can be accepting, we can be loving and motivated.
Yeah. That you can change it from being anxious to curious or something like that. That's what's in the video.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So you catch yourself, and because you try to be controlling, you can be rejecting, you can be irritable, you can be tense, you can be insistent. Okay, those are all your critic. So when you get defensive, you get the critic. That's what people need. And then you shift that critic to calm. You're like, okay, well, I'll just invite Greg to realize that I had internet problems, and hopefully Greg's in a curious space, and and then we can just bring together, and even if he's not, we'll figure something out. So it's about how to take those immediate negative reactions, create a healthy adult space for them, and guide you towards the kinds of processes to integrate those negative emotions, but toward productive, valued states of being. That's basically what
and also in your system, like related to those planes, you have like this Freudian filter and Rogerian filter, like, and this Rogerian filter is like connected with this justification systems or some, if I'm correct, I don't know. Like, what is
right? Well, actually, both are. Okay, so this gets into the second branch. You're going through all the branches. Okay, so no, that's fine. So the second branch, the first branch is the tree of knowledge systems. So that's the 4 cones upside down. Okay. Then, and that's the biggest, most important branch in terms of the overarching structure, okay? The second branch on the tree is justification systems theory, okay? It fits into the tree of knowledge system as the joint point between mind, which when I use the term mind, I'm talking about the animal kingdom, okay? And then how, so that's all, it goes all the way from insects to primates.
Okay. Behavioral investments or something like that.
Yes, behavioral investment theory, the third branch on the tree, is the joint point or the transition from how in the Cambrian explosion, we were, the world was populated by plants and things like jellyfish. And then all of a sudden out of the Cambrian explosion came complex active animals with brains and nervous systems that were centralized, and then they were running around doing all the things animals do. Okay, behavioral investment theory is the frame for what happened, basically how plants turned into animals and what is the function of the nervous system. Okay, and then the second thing is, so then you've got the entire animal kingdom getting up to, say, modern day chimpanzees, which is akin to where we were 7 million years ago. But then our line took off. Of course, chimpanzees have been evolving, but we have been evolving at a rate that's just qualitatively different for a whole host of reasons. And then we get into this whole issue of gather together, we have shared intentional space, we have more tool use, we have more rhythms, we have more gesturing, and then there's a tipping point in the language, and then there's the construction of the justification process and the construction of justification systems, okay? And what the argument there is that transforms the human mind, okay? And essentially what you have at the primate mind level, you have a phenomenological system, okay? Meaning primates see the world, they feel, they have rich emotional experiences, they form alliances, they track their place in the world, They care about their young deeply, of course. They engage in what Franz de Waal calls chimpanzee politics. They do all of that, okay? But they do it all enacted and embodied. They don't do it through any kind of propositional justification, okay? That's what makes us so different, all right? And the propositional justification creates an entirely new landscape, okay? And then it shifts our mind, all right? So what happens to our mind is as we know when we deal with other animals, that phenomenological subjectivity, the experiential self of a primate is contained. It's only indirectly accessible via language. But when you open up the highway of information, now with propositional knowledge and question and answer dynamics, we can ask each other, so Greg, what do you think of this?
Yeah.
Right? And now that means that you have a complete, through questions and shared language and some background knowledge that we can then share, now we have a complete highway into what's called my interpreter system. My interpreter system is the way in which my language system is regulating my phenomenology and then sharing it publicly. Okay? So this interpreter system's got an inside dimension of justification that's called the private narrator, and then the public justification system. The relationship between private and public is called the Rogerian Filter. Okay? That's when you decide whether or not you're going to share something. Okay? If you ever make something a secret, you're creating a Rogerian filter, a private to public filter around it so that other people don't get access. You put a lock on a diary, or I'm a clinician, we make a pact that this will be confidential. That's a Rogerian filter. Okay? Notice we're making a distinction between that. Then you get into the Freudian filter, which is the relationship between the interpreter, that part of your mind that says, oh, this is how I feel, this is how I should feel, language, self-conscious justification, versus the experiential phenomenological self that operates in pictures, images, affects, okay? That goes into ensoulment, more what Zach talks about, okay, at that level. So the Freudian filter is how you go from the phenomenology to the interpreter. The Rogerian filter is how you go from a private interpreter to a public display. And it's those both private and public justification, what I call mind 3, that sits atop of our mind 2 phenomenology that's embedded in our mind 1 habits and action system.
That's mind 3M or something you mentioned.
Well, it's 3A is inside and 3B is out here. So whenever I'm saying something, it becomes 3B. And when I'm inside, I'm just talking to myself, that's 3A. And that's important because whether or not some other entity has access to it, whether it comes across sort of the contained membrane of my subjectivity.
And you mentioned propositional, so that's like connected with John Vervaeke's also these 4 types of knowing, or 4,
exactly.
It's like propositional, perspectival, procedural, and maybe the 4th one,
participatory.
Right. So, that's quite an important one.
And that's really, he emphasized that. But so you want to think about your procedural. For me, procedural is most basic. Okay, this is how reflex turns into sort of regulated procedural recipe controlled systems, and they relate to your habit. Okay, and if you think about
vocational education as well, like kind of
you can get trained in anything that has a recipe knowledge can then get trained, and then you'll notice that anything you do with repetitive that has constraints and clarity between stimulus response sets will then turn into a procedural habit system that you just need to be primed by the stimulus that will activate your procedural instinct. Really, once you a learned instinct, that's not an oxymoron, but then basically now you then just enact it. Okay. So that's the base of your system, is really a non-conscious procedural habit system. Okay. Then what happens on top of that is a perspectival and participatory system. Okay. The perspectival is what I call mind 2. That's the internal subjective. But of course, your mind 2 is constantly in dynamic relation with your mind 1 overt action, and to then engage in what John calls the agent arena environment toward a particular theme, or toward a particular identity, or toward a particular goal that doesn't have procedural pre-specified outcomes, but instead requires the complex, adaptive, dynamic participation between agent and arena.
And complex, it's because it's not algorithmic, but it's also not random. It's something between. Right.
Well, it's complex, adaptive, meaning that yes, it has certain attractor states, but they're not necessarily pre-specified, and they were much more sort of fluid and iterative in relation. And so the participatory knowledge is that embodied engagement of the agent and arena relation. Good participatory knowledge is when you're in a novel situation, but you get a grip on it, okay? So if you pop into a scenario and then all of a sudden find a groove and you get flow in a novel, you now demonstrate great participatory knowledge. You don't know but you have an intuition. When you're feeling really clunky and trying to get something, then you have low participatory knowledge. You know, when it just seems like
jazz jamming or something, like when people
you jam and everything is like all the notes. If you got me trying to jam, it would be lousy participatory knowledge because I can't carry a tune.
Yeah, me too.
Okay. So all of that is we share all that knowledge systems with primates. Other primates have those other P's, but the person is the propositional knowledge, and then all of what that engenders across generations and everything else, that becomes your person side of your consciousness. So person corresponds to proposition. And then on top of your humanness, when I use the word person, I literally mean it as an entity that can identify and justify its actions on the social stage and take responsibility, pre-specified responsibility for one's actions. That's what a person is. And that connects to self-conscious knowledge and propositional knowledge and intersubjective language space that is called the culture person plane of existence. The other systems are shared with the other primates. So that's what makes it. And justification systems theory is as I told John, it's a theory of your propositional knowledge system. It's a theory about where it came, about how it organized, how it connects to the other three systems. That's another reason we're excited in talking to each other. So his taxonomy then shifts into my system. And now I can say, actually, John, my first insight was essentially a theory of the propositional knowledge system, the justification systems theory.
Yeah, and I heard some of you saying that it's also connected, maybe, probably it could be John, but it's connected with counterfactual somehow, the ability to construct counterfactuals. Like
yes, exactly. That's a very important, it is important concept because, so the tipping point of our propositional knowledge, why does propositional knowledge have such a big impact? There are a lot of reasons, but one of the main things is, so if I say antelope, there, okay, or I have fragmented, broken symbols, okay. If you engage in philosophy or other aspects of linguistics, the fundamental unit of meaning is a proposition. And what they mean by a fundamental unit of meaning is that it carries truth content that you can then decipher. And the way you carry truth content is decipher it in relationship to what a counterfactual would be.
Okay,
right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what happens with the emergence of propositional knowledge is the emergence, the problem of justification, okay? The problem of justification, the analytic problem of justification is the emergence of the counterfactual. Okay? Analytic meaning there's a truth claim that's being made. So if I say, hey, the antelope are over there, okay? Then you open up counterfactual space immediately if you have question answer potential that says, how do you know?
How do you know? Okay.
Meaning maybe they're not, maybe they're over there, right? So now we have the problem of analytic justification, which is, do my truth claim statements correspond to reality? We go look over there, and if they're there, I say I was right, and if you say they're over there and they were, one of us is right, okay? So that's the first problem of justification that emerges with propositions is the counterfactual, and then you have the analytic problem that you then question it, okay? And then this space of what is true and what is the negative creates a critical dialectical conversation. And I mean the critical dialectic in a lot of different ways. I mean it like in Roy Bhaskara's sense. It gets into what John was thinking. We have to coordinate factual claims, counterfactual claims. There's an enormous amount, you can really get into all sorts of new kinds of problems when you have to deal with propositional truth claims.
Also, you discussed this kind of way how to get above this culture plane. Like, is it possible somehow, and is it like through some kind of new meta language or metaculture or trans narrative? Like, not the meta narrative, meaning like the modernist big narratives, but some transmedia. It's like Jeff Gomez kind of idea. So, but like I saw you jamming around that idea, and I find it the most exciting and fascinating because it's really at the edge of humanity's kind of what is this portal? What is this adjacent possible? How to get there? What is it?
Well, so we're right in the liminal space, and as far as I'm concerned, so here's what we're looking at as far as I'm concerned. Okay, so we have the emergence of the digital. So that's the techno information processing system, all right? That's like language, but it's not content specified, it's just medium specified, okay? Then the question fundamentally is, what kind of mentality, all right, do we need to maintain consistency of the emergence of that information processing, okay? Well, we used to be cultural paradigmatic creatures, okay? Meaning that we were born into a culture, all right? You would never, for a long time, you'd never visit another culture. You're born as an Egyptian. You may know that other cultures exist, but you were completely a paradigmatic Egyptian, okay? It was only the intellectuals and then, you know, in this early civilization that would even know or wonder and start to wrestle with the process of paradigms, okay? But we're very paradigmatic, of course, in the oral indigenous stage. We're very paradigmatic in the pre-modern stage, okay? Modern science is the first attempt to get a transcendent, well, I mean, religions tried to claim it, but modern science actually then generated, with its objective epistemology, started to generate a metacultural knowledge system, okay? Which then the modernists thought that they could just follow to the transcendent position. And Hegel is most clear about this. The absolute spirit would then, we could follow a philosophy of understanding and then we could transcend, okay?
It's the is-ought distinction, like it's not easy to transcend it.
It's not easy.
It's not possible.
You got a lot of problems, okay? I think
objective versus intersective.
Hegel is brilliant, and I think he was onto a lot of things, and I love Cadell Last's work as he's doing right now on, I mean, that he's done in his course on Hegel. It's been helpful for me, and anyway, but nobody gets it right. I mean, what I would say is, they didn't have, when they're trying to get to the top, and they don't have the modern evolutionary synthesis. They don't have behavioral investment theory of how to understand. They don't have the justification hypothesis. So they're missing all sorts of different things. So they're making these unbelievably abstract claims in absolutist transcendent terms without even filling in the, guess what? They're going to have problems. Okay. Now, and I'm not even claiming, I don't think, to me, what I like is the signifier of the absolute metaphysical. Okay, so there's a signifier. I actually call it in my system, it's the elephant sun god, okay, which becomes an absolute signifier of the metaphysical absolute, okay? That is essentially my understanding of Hegel's, the movement toward Geist, which is basically a projection. It's the concept of God, okay? And there is something about the concept of God and its negativity and the way it reflects back that is powerful and oriented in the way humans justify things, okay? And that is the meta point. That's the ultimate metaphysical point in my system, okay? But what we mostly need, we need anchorage to that, but we also need pluralism around our paradigms, okay? This is where we get into a trans-paradigmatic mindset, all right? Which means I can then drop into your paradigm, okay, what you were socialized in culture, and empathize with it without becoming it or feeling that that's all that there is. Okay, it's recognizing the paradigms for what they are, which are cultural systems of justification that legitimized is and ought and coordinated groups of people, you know, and there are many, many different options. What the before this point have so often done, well, the pre-modern, they reify them, okay? So they reify them, meaning that they think that this is that the Christ God is the only real God, right? Or whatever. And then the modernist view is like, oh, we can transcend them with objective knowledge, but you have is, ought, and a whole other bunch of problems. Then the postmodernist comes and says, no, it's all crap. We forgot what, in the language of the unified theory, you're missing the justification systems theory that contextualizes everything, okay? That's the insight that you're missing. You are trying to claim justifications, yet you're embedded in one that you don't realize that you haven't factored out, okay? Well, then the unified theory comes along to the postmodern people and says, yeah, but now with a framing of what justification systems are placed in the context of cosmic evolution, I can adopt a meta-modern move, okay, that takes your deconstruction that points out justification dynamics and then replaces it in a cosmic evolutionary map that says, here is my perspective that has a transcendent view of the whole, not the transcendent, but a transcendent view of the whole, and now allows me to bounce around in many other different paradigms as I've now made a lateral move in relation, if that makes sense.
So it's like partial perspectives, like these paradigms are like partial perspectives, what Daniel Schmachtenberger says, like, and now you can have actually it's like seeing one part of the house, but you can have a kind of like it's better to have a video than just a photograph, and to go inside the house and see as many perspectives as possible. And so maybe
Right.
like kind of now you see the hyper object or something, or maybe not see, but you can at least
frame. You can put in a totally different constraint frame on it and see that the postmodern critique of modernism was valid. But the idea that you're done from any grand meta-narrative is too extreme. There are meta-narratives that actually can be tied together. It's what I call integrated pluralism. If you look at the themes of the inner, you can then get a perspective of the house and the different people in it, and get a gestalt of the house through the various lenses together. As long as you understand that those paradigms are systems of justification, that is a meta move, because now they're all of a particular type, then the content is different, the perspective is different, but then you juxtapose them utilizing this tool, basically, this framing tool. Oh, that's what they are. Now I can see them. Now I can move outside or adjacent possible. Now I can see them in relation, and boom, that's a totally different meta move.
Mm-hmm. And how would you call this this plane about the culture?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. It's a metacultural consciousness. Okay, metacultural consciousness. We need to direct our energies toward metacultural consciousness. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that's what. So we used to have just cultural consciousness. We became conscious as persons. We adopted our personal identity. Okay. We then sought the transcendent, which I still want to relate to, but we'll never have the equation of God. We can only sort of see it and imagine it. But we can develop a metacultural, right? This is the step above, we're fifth dimension, okay? Direct our energies towards, so by the way, this becomes a cool little thing of E toward MC squared. Metacultural consciousness is what we need our energies towards too, okay? So now we can, we have Einstein's equation there and, whatever. But I'm just saying that so what does it mean? It means now we can see ourselves as cultural entities, okay? And develop a meta perspective. So yeah, I'm totally. I mean, this is what, of course, you're learning as a psychologist. What we learned, it's like, oh my gosh, you grew up as a white man in privilege. What's your white privilege? You're a modernist. You learn all of that stuff. But if I learned it through the postmodern lens, which is there's no concluding or synthetic point that you can get to. And then I was like, wait a minute, I can step outside all of that. And I can have all of me and now be adjacent to these things, both be in them and outside of them. In a Wilberian move, I can move lower left and then move to right, okay, lower right, and be like, oh, I can be inside and outside, and now I can hold because I have a framing for them. And if we can all do that, rather than like fight for our, Peter Lindbergh talks about, the mimetic wars and Culture War 2.0. It's like you're just an agent of that little justification system as you sort of wave your little territory. We need places like the Stoa that then come together. It's like, oh, okay, well, yeah, let me share why I have the baton that I have, recognizing that you're just in a different territory. Not that we have to compete, but realizing that we can be part of the tapestry as the whole, and I can jump into your system and you can jump into mine. And man, we able to do that. That's a fundamentally different kind of relating.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, like a patchwork of instant paradigms or small paradigms, like
that's right.
Some small instant temporary collaboration, and then kind of dissolving into
the swarm idea would come together, boom,
swarm,
in the digital world and the recognition. So see how it frees what was our paradigmatic identity. I mean, I'm in America, so people are holding on to Trump. I mean, they've internalized that, not to get into politics, but basically this becomes, oh my God, they feel like, they don't say this, but they basically feel like little tribe herb animals, and they have to have an identity that's bigger than themselves, and they cling to that, and it has to be true, and the stupid liberals are all crazy over there, and we know the truth, and then that gives them their sense of transcendence. So and their behaving is very culture persons, okay? We want to basically be like, I want to be able to look at everybody around this thing and said, okay, you're playing your cultural tune, folks, okay? We actually want to see those instruments play not against each other to create noise, but actually, how do you get the instruments playing together in a song that actually gives rise to a higher level meta-cultural conscious experience?
And you use those jazz metaphors in your discussion with Jordan and John.
I circle back on those.
And I like that's what I mentioned, this like a meta concert. Like therefore, I like the word.
It opens up that adjacent possible space of seeing it that way.
Actually, now we are at 1 hour mark, and I don't want to take your time, so I don't know.
I actually blocked off till 12:30. I have to go at 12:30, but
okay.
That means I do have another half hour. If you
okay, I mean, we don't need to use up the whole half an hour, but if you want to continue a couple of minutes, I mean, we can, but depends on you.
Sure, I feel like we certainly have some time left.
Yeah.
So I normally, in my experience in these Zoom calls, an hour feels a little short, so I generally block off an hour and a half.
Okay, that's nice. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's kind of fascinating to think this kind of time, you know, like where we have so much knowledge, but also so much new and interesting content like you are creating with and especially these discussions, you know, like this like in 3 to 4 3 people together, not just 2.
Yes.
Or like it's quite innovative, and I like it. I also watch Stoa some of their sessions from time to time.
So actually, we can, yeah, I'm curious to get your take if you want to, you know, just in terms of what you are seeing, doing, hoping, worried about, things along those lines.
Okay. Yeah. So, well, it's kind of, for me, this is just a hobby, right? I work for like our development agency in Slovakia. So I think we are doing, well, we are funding projects abroad. And before I was working on the other side of this relationship, like for one foundation, but it's, okay, you know, Slovakia is a very small country, and also the money amounts is something, it's like smaller than a private foundation in the US. Like the whole country might be doing kind of less than the Gates Foundation or something. So, but we are a small country, and I'm based in Bratislava, and I was working in Kenya. Like I was there maybe around 20 times in the last decade. And we were kind of well, we were working on projects that kind of developed into rural, like one of the first rural startup hubs. So the idea before was that you can have these startup hubs in like big cities, like capital towns like Nairobi. You had one in iHub even sooner than in Slovakia, but the people were not really that well, nobody really at that time, maybe it was 2015, these rural startup hubs were not so popular because, you know, everything is happening in big cities. So why would you do something in a countryside or a small town? And so our SOTE hub is based in Voi. So it's like a smaller town between Nairobi and Mombasa. And but before we worked with and we still work with teachers like Slovak and Kenyan teachers, so like kind of intercultural exchanges and digital technology together with business education, but for high schools and for rural kids, like so kind of like student startup companies, and then also supporting real companies, but it's like with small money. It's mostly like it's like a deep play more than founding another Facebook or something, but some of them are okay, doing okay, our graduates. So that's like the idea. But therefore, I'm interested, of course, what in your work and in complexity science, like what Jordan and Daniel are doing, and also your work, like Zach Steins, and I'm also coming to this your space from the point of or from the viewpoint of effective altruism. And what I found in Daniel's work is kind of like a meta even like move from theirs, because they're thinking about existential risks, but he's like thinking about the generator functions of existential risk or categories of risk. So just, I don't want to keep it too long, but this is like where I come from, and I want to get more practical. I'm too in this perspectival, knowing kind of things. I like concepts, and maybe I can grasp just bits of concepts, not too deeply. But I loved kind of these subcultures and discussing between and also Alexander Bart's work from last year. I think I was and this year I just got aware of him and of you, and before, maybe year before, Daniel Schmachtenberger, Schmachtenberger and Jordan Hall, and Forest Landry. So I'm quite fascinated by
this. Yeah, no, that's brilliant, and it's crucial. I mean, these are the kinds of innovations, you know, tech, digital tech, human intercultural kinds of notions, and then they need to be grounded, to me, to the extent that we can ground these in the proper philosophies, the metacultural conscious philosophies, right, that figure out how to preserve the cultural histories with dignity, well-being, and integrity, understand what the ultimate values are, understand how changing dynamics and the system, complex adaptive system interrelations, not that you can ever predict that stuff, but have an awareness of it and build that in, bake that in. So it's so cool that you are, as you do all that, you're downloading these kinds of perspectives. This is exactly, for the kind of transformation that I'm envisioning on the back half of the 21st century. If we are successful, your life is exactly the kind of thread, that is going to move what is a dangerous ship right now into one that actually can then get networked and stable, and we can have, more rich, fulfilling psychological, social, relational lives, and much more sustainable in relationship to our relationships between each other and the planet and everything.
Yeah, but then, and therefore it's quite fascinating to see like these kind of subcultures or memetic tribes, what Peter Limberg calls them, or kind of converge onto this kind of global awareness, especially this year, that actually there is this class of catastrophic risks and then existential risks that can wipe out the whole humanity, and it's kind of the dynamics is quite self-terminating in the long run if we don't change something fundamentally. And I think it's kind of connected also with language, and especially with your like language and justification systems and culture. And so how to change the language or the concept as maybe what Alexander Barth calls like this shamanic, or like the shamans, they're maybe able to, or diplomats, let's say, or something, they're able to compress some concepts, like compress loads of concepts, and therefore expand the Dunbar's number well above 150, because we can connect through ideas. So, like we connect through your concepts, or we translate it to concepts of other people, like Bart's, Jordan Hall's, and so it's kind of easier for us to relate.
Right. Yeah, that's the dream and the hope and the vision. I haven't been, there's a movie called Close Encounters of the Third Kind that is the story. It's the third kind of aliens, and before they get there, what happens to people is they start experiencing visions. There's a vision of Devil's Mountain, but it's this shape and this image of a mountain, or the shape, and like something like 10, 15,000 people or whatever on Earth, just wake up and start with more and more urgency, see this image, okay? And that's what the story is. And what's happening is then they make a pilgrimage to the image, and what's happened is the aliens have, dropped whatever, and then they show up, at this point. Well, that's quite frankly, over the last 3 years, 2 to 3 years, for me, when I had the tree of knowledge insight and saw the fifth joint point, my life was set. That was, that was the singular. I was going to correct the image of where psychology was, and then situate a scientific humanistic philosophy. And then pretty clearly started in a digital world. That became, just what my constitution saw. And it's never really wavered from that. But now what's so cool is that there are exactly these other people that are engaged in similar kinds of compressions, okay, if you want to use that term, that then can get yoked up in particular ways that do allow us the constraints, the language, the frame of reference, the practices for this metacultural consciousness move. And if we can do that, we will do the butterfly thing and transition from the caterpillar, from the cultural caterpillars of eating away at our particular need to be part of a mimetic tribe, to particular way to consume, to particular way to defend and gain a kind of territory, into a particular metacultural consciousness that has a game B sensibility that allows us to come together as swarms, at healthy swarms with particular value-based constraints in the virtual world, and then, engender a life that is conducive to the digital, conducive to nations and cultures, conducive to our primate selves, and conducive to the rest of the planet. That's the vision and the hope.
And it's very fascinating that through your conversation, I heard this year, like you started in 1996 or something like that, like those, and developing it until today. And so how do you feel like when it's actually getting traction, like these kind of not well, particularly your ideas as well, but also similar kind of in the adjacent space.
It's weird, you know. Yeah, it's definitely weird. I mean, it's been weird at various times in my life. It was weird when it first happened, okay, and I knew no one was in any position to see it. But then I built it enough, and I saw it enough clearly, so that 3 or 4 years of developing. So by 1998, 1999, I was trying to convince the other. But at this time, I had no frame of reference for exactly how they'd respond. But the established blue church people in the world, like Daniel Dennett, Steve Pinker, Richard Dawkins, even Stephen Hawking, I was like, hey, and I sent my stuff to all those people. And when this was when I'm a postdoc, and of course, no one paid any attention to me. And it took me a little while to realize that I couldn't sell it to any individual at the time. And then what I thought would happen is I'd sell it once it got established in the professional literature, and I was a professor, and I had enough networks that I could get it leverage inside the blue church of psychology. That's what I'd been doing. And so I published, and I got a job, and I had a pedigree enough, you know, I'd work with the right people. But when it came out, although everyone related, you know, I never talk to anybody that doesn't really get it one-on-one. I mean, for some people, yeah, it's too big, but nobody like gets it and critiques it. Okay, it's like people offer criticisms of it, but the general gist of it lives at a level of pristine truth, and that just is seen, okay, over and over and over and over again. But people have radically different reactions to it. And what I didn't appreciate was to get institutional change in the traditional modernist sense. What you really need is the social forces that are interconnected to actually leverage institutional change have a number of ingredients that are required that I now was missing, okay? So even the intellectual arguments were there. They, were too far ahead of where the institution was. Okay? That's one thing. B, I didn't have enough, although I was networked, there was no institutional leverage. And C, actually, I was critiquing a hell of a lot of what the institution was invested in, and basically saying, hey, man, we've gone down a lot of wrong paths. There is a way forward. It's through this system. You have to drop a lot of what your empiricist thinking is and reboot and then move in this direction. Well, the combination of those things basically means that the blue church will just eat this idea and ignore it. Okay? That's what I discovered. So, I didn't have the language for that, but that's essentially what happened over the 20-year period up until like 1997. And 2017. And I got weirder and weirder. I turned my system into a damn garden. You know, it was already called the tree of knowledge. Then I turned it into a garden. You think psychologists can even relate to that? You know, so I got weirder and weirder. And then the really weird thing is, some things happened. I'm not getting into in my relationship with like the program, and I got more and more alienated. And then I popped into Alexander Bard's world. I was also trailing the, Jordan Peterson phenomenon, which was very significant. I have essentially exactly his training. So I'm a clinical theoretical personality psychologist. Okay.
Well, so we have to thank Jordan Peterson for John Vervaeke. You know, it's like
totally. Yeah. Like, no doubt.
It's like the second version. I don't want to, it's different, but I can realize it's very technical and it's very niche. But I think this is the idea. Like it's that we have.
Listen, so Jordan Peterson rips something across the cultural space. Intellectual deep web is definitely in his wake more than anybody else. He rips, and obviously Rebel Wisdom, and that is the most prominent probably media place of all the little ecologies that have emerged. And he certainly, and quite frankly, he changed me, and I'm actually right more than even than John. I'm right underneath Peterson in the sense that that's my whole training. My whole training is a theoretical clinical personality psychologist. And so to watch that structure and get it opened up was definitely, and then to be popped into these alternative ecologies who are having this blue church relationship to the institution. That's the zeitgeist. That's the macro level social forces that are throwing us all of us that have this particular view, like Brett Weinstein in his own view of evolutionary biology, and Eric Weinstein in his view of physics. All of us that are actually have been seeing aspects of the blue church and then feeling their distributed idea suppression complex, to use Eric Weinstein's terms, of DISC, and then battling them and then being flown out and then finding another ecology that actually has a shared culture that's actually is very sane inducing. I mean, I was going a little insane going like, why is this so clear to me? And why won't, and everybody else when I talk individually, and then it just goes away. But then to see it and then to have hope, you know, so it does, it's also made me aware as I got out of it. I now have less and less faith in the blue church. I see it for what it is, and it's a lot scarier. So we have all of this thinly stacked global interdependencies that can topple over. So, you know, my family's had to deal with me wandering around the last 2 years going, global civilization collapsed, it's real, you know. But at the same time, there's all this hope for transition. So it's been fascinating and cool, and the last 2 years have been great for me.
Well, big respect, because you are working, you know, on one idea for and dedicated for 20, I don't know, what is it, 24 years or something.
Basically,
and,
yeah.
you know, sometimes I feel like I'm writing one blog post, I don't know, in Slovak, I have a blog, or in
yeah, no, I saw your work. I liked it. Yeah,
but in Slovakia, I also worked actually, well, you know, I'm writing, but maybe 1 in 100 articles get some traction, meaning like it inspires like some, and it gets into some kind of like a vision or strategy paper or something like that.
right.
So it's like, I see like there was one party that kind of collapsed because it was like, you would call it maybe blue church in a way, but it was what means operating in the old paradigm, like complicated instead of complex and stuff like that. So, but it has had some potential because it had a lot of technical people and smart people, but then it collapsed because of you know, this woke phenomenon and everything. But I, for example, inspired their vision, like there was some kind of particular issue of benchmarking that I suggested to benchmark across as many dimensions as possible, because one dimension is too narrow and it creates all this complicated stuff that Daniel Schmachtenberger talks about. But okay, so but what I want, well, okay, again, I've got lost myself, but I like your, yeah, what I wanted to say, big respect that you stayed in the wilderness for 24 years, and sometimes I feel like, oh, my article only 300 people read it, or only 20 people saw my video, and then it's like, okay, I need to be humble and patient, because I think of people like you, like yeah. So basically that's it. Well, big respect.
Yeah. Well, right. I mean, it's you know, from my vantage point, it's been a heck of it has been a journey. I've struggled that. You know, a while ago, I got to at peace with it, and it is, and basically my frame is, you know, it's the closest thing to a calling. I don't really believe in the supernatural, but I believe in the mystical, and it's, you know, been a calling. So I've been really fortunate to then follow that calling, and that's, you know, that's real. I barely had any choice, Jacob, really.
Yeah.
it's like there it is, and I have to go to that. You know, that's the vision.
So just like concerning this blue church or cathedral or dominance hierarchy or something, maybe I have a unique perspective, but it's connected with something called worldly mapping. The guy is called Worldly. He's from Britain, and he has kind of maps onto Alexander Bard's, like this nomadology versus eventology, like the cyclical versus the radical move, and basically it's like, and it also maps to this Dave Snowden's complicated versus complex, or ordered and chaotic.
Sure.
But the idea is basically, like that you want to move the innovation, like what we are doing now is the innovation in the chaotic or complex spaces. And usually those innovations are quite messy, and then you get like custom built products. So, but usually these products are clunky, and only like some nerds or really interested people use them. And then you move into standardized and scalable products that are kind of, you know, and finally you move into commodity spaces, like very standardized, not the differentiated commodities, but then, your as a company, your strategy or your idea should be to dominate this, to make this move as fast as possible, to move some innovation through these stages of custom build and product into commodity space. And then you can leverage it and build like a stack about it. So you can move again, make a circle back into the genesis. He calls it genesis in worldly mapping. like to move into new innovation. So for me, this blue church kind of is too stuck in the complicated systems, and they are not even good at complicated systems, meaning like, but really, like, why don't we have fast trains in Slovakia? Like, you know, we have a train slower than in Kenya. There is actually one train that it takes like 12 hours or 10 hours to another, like the further city in Slovakia. In Kenya, you can make it in, I don't know, 8 hours or 6 hours, you know. So, and the train doesn't have a restaurant kind of carriage, so where you don't have a food service there. So, okay, we have another route which is faster and great, but for all those people that live in South, it's kind of like, they feel like second-class citizens. So that's like one example from Slovakia. That this blue church, or I don't know how you call it, the old paradigm kind of structure from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, let's say, they are not able even to do the fast trains, which is a complicated system, you know. But then you would need to move into the complex domain to do real innovation about the complicated. That's what you are trying to do. But basically, I'm also making peace with them in a way that they're just stuck in these complicated, too many complicated and outdated well, not innovation, it's just commodities. It used to be innovations maybe in 100 years ago. So I'm sorry.
Right. Yeah, so that's exactly right. So what we're doing is we're hooking up in the wilderness of complex adaptive digital space. Okay? And we're trying to then build these systems, and ultimately, if enough of us stick together and create a zeitgeist and then somehow relate to the old paradigms, we can make the bridge to Zach's, you know, education at a time between worlds. Somehow we have to connect, identify where the institutions are, recognize this is going to be a long damn time, you know, so, you know, relax, get a beer at some levels. At the same time, we have a lot to be careful on and an enormous amount of work to do at the level of, so it's patience, but energy at the same time. It's an interesting dynamic, but there's also a lot of excitement getting this mentality out. I believe there's a lot of, if we get it right, the frequency of distribution, we can create a lot of transformation faster, you know, than as long as we get the condensing correct, you know, and we distribute our network, collective intelligence. And I really see a lot of potential for that in ways that I wouldn't have thought of before, because so many of us are seeing different angles on the same thing, create that integrated pluralism. And if we can extract that, the gold of that, we'll create a transcendental beacon, a meta-trans position, like you know, and then we can sort of like raise the awareness and then utilize that to make the transitions. So.
Oh. Okay, thank you. I think I will leave you your 8 minutes or something before.
Hey, I have a listserv. It's active. It's kind of like I can put you on it if you'd be interested.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, certainly sign off. It's about like Alexander's, so it's pretty heavy. In terms of its active, it's different in tone. Alexander's is a more, you know, phallic tone. Mine's a little more collegial, and you know, we don't attack people and tell them that they're jerking off over their mother's titties or anything. So we don't do that. But it's an engaging list. So I'll put you on it, and we'll stay in touch. And I mean, have another conversation at some point. If you are going to share this with any, please let me know. I'll share it with my listserv.
Yeah, you know, I have like this very small YouTube. It's really small. It's like 20 people watch it, but it's between ideas and subcultures, I call it. And I did some previews with my Kenyan friends. It was just like
brilliant. Well, set it up, and then I'll share that. I'll put it on. You'll get at least you know 10 or 15 people probably from my list to watch. Okay.
Thank you. But it was great to talk to you, and
really enjoyed it. And take care. We'll be back in touch. Okay.
Take care and respect for your work.
All righty.
Bye.